Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. For those who are new here, we are studying Sri Aurobindo's major work, The Synthesis of Yoga, line by line. We have reached part 1, chapter 6. And the reason for reading line by line and diving into it is to internalize, to connect with Sri Aurobindo's consciousness. These lines, this text, become the doorway to enter the yogic consciousness, the higher states from where Sri Aurobindo was looking at the world and writing these books. These are inspired texts coming from higher states of consciousness, and these words and its rhythms and forms carry that consciousness. So by reading and dwelling on it, we come in touch with it, and slowly that consciousness will form us. That's the whole journey of inner transformation. So now, in the last episode, we have learned about that our frontal personality is only a tiny wave on the surface. There is a wide spectrum below. There is inner ranges and there are ranges above us, that is superconscient. And what is inner is subliminal, and what is below is subconscient. And all these are influencing our current outer surface personality, of which we are not necessarily fully aware. And in yoga, we learn to go from surface personality to go inward into the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, and further deep into the psychic being and psychic consciousness that alone can discern what comes from above, the action of the Shakti coming from the superconscient planes above. And that light and force entering, the psychic being discerns. And with that, the transformation of the whole nature unfolds, which is the process we are looking at as integral yoga and its methodology of transforming the human nature, not only the mind, vital, all the way to the physical, and even to discovering the very mystery of matter and the very material substance itself getting divinized. All that we have touched upon in the last episode. Now let's proceed to this episode, which is 88. Link to this chapter is in the description. We are starting from paragraph 28. But all this can only constitute a greater inner life with a greater possibility of the outer action, and is a transitional achievement. So this whole journey inward, discovering the psychic being, even ascension to a certain extent, all these are transitional accomplishment. It gives great power of universalization, getting to know the world forces and modify it, engage with it. Everything is possible, but it is still a transitional achievement. Sri Aurobindo is pointing always at something that is very, very central to his teachings. So all these great accomplishments are necessary on the way, but we are not to rest with these initial discoveries and potential capacities that emerge with it. So all this can only constitute a greater inner life with a greater possibility of outer action. So it is simultaneously a greater inner life as well as an outer action. Unlike many yogic paths that only focusing on the inner life and the inner development and liberation, here we are looking at also greater outer action, and is a transitional achievement. The full transformation can come only by the ascent of the sacrifice to its farthest heights, and its action upon life with the power and light and beatitude of the divine supramental Gnosis. So this chapter, the Ascent of the Sacrifice, last chapter as well, the Ascent of Sacrifice 1, this is Ascent of Sacrifice 2. Ascent is the key factor here. In our offering, work as a worship and offering and opening to inner dimensions and opening to upper regions and receiving that force into us, and that force preparing us, gradually this force will lift us up, upward. And there is an ascension of consciousness into higher planes of the mind, the spiritual ranges of the mind, into higher mind, illumined mind, intuition, overmind. All these are still the spiritual ranges of the mind where there is consciousness of oneness, but yet not the totality in its dynamism is arrived at. Here, Sri Aurobindo insists on going beyond the overmind itself to supermind and supramental Gnosis. That way of knowing and being and doing, that is where he is continuously and repeatedly pointing at. The ascent of the sacrifice to its farthest heights and its action upon life. Not only ascension, but its action here upon life with the power and light and beatitude. It's not just power, it's also light and beatitude of it, that profound divine grace that pours into this, of the divine supramental Gnosis. For then alone, all the forces that are divided and expresses themselves imperfectly in life and its works are raised to their original unity, harmony, single truth, authentic absoluteness, and entire significance. It is when we discover the supramental plane and its corresponding consciousness and force, that's when all that operates in division comes together in a profound unity, harmony, obeying single truth. Normally, our mind, if you look at mind operates independently and it has its own limited will. Even within the mind, you will find internal conflicts happening. So mind as an instrument operates independently. So does the emotional being operates independently as another instrument. Our energy operates as another instrument. Senses operating independently, body operating independently. All of them having their independent will, or broadly can be classified as knowledge, love, and will. These are three fundamental faculties, and they can independently act through us. In our lower nature, they are further fractured, fragmented, operating in isolation. As we go inward into the psychic being brings together these instruments and to begin the process of integration. First is purification and then integration, so that increasingly knowledge, love, and power begins to work together. And that will get further enhanced as we ascend into higher planes and open to that greater light and force of the Shakti coming down, this process of integration and its increasingly wider and greater capacity for action in the world will increase, will develop. And as we ascend all the way to the supramental Gnosis, that is where the complete unity, harmony of a single truth that integrates the transcendent, universal, and individual into one harmonious movement of a single truth will reveal itself in a very powerful dynamic form, dynamic process, and its rhythm. Otherwise, what happens is this realizations of the individual soul within, or the universal self, or transcendent, can be experienced in isolation. And we do have in the world many philosophies, schools based on isolated experience of the individual or universal or transcendent self, coming up with different perspectives that don't necessarily agree. Besides, this separative experience also doesn't give the full power for transformation of the nature, human nature individually and collectively. And fundamentally shifting the earth consciousness will not be possible. Whereas an ascension into supermind brings this complete integration of the individual, universal, and transcendent with knowledge, will, and love, or the instrumentation integrated, or the levels of our being integrated into this massive, original unity, harmony, and action of a single truth, to the minutest detail of atoms, to the supreme consciousness above. The full spectrum moves as a whole. So for then alone, all the forces that are divided and expresses themselves imperfectly in life and its works are raised to their original unity, harmony, single truth, authentic absoluteness, and entire significance. There is an authentic absoluteness of all these powers, what appears to be fragmented and isolated in our lower nature, and their true significance in the profound light of the supramental Gnosis will become revealed to the seeker, and it become dynamically effective in the life of the seeker. There, knowledge and will are one. Love and force a single movement. This is not our normal experience. The gap between thought and action, perception and action, our understanding and action, we can grow in awareness, we can develop great deal of knowledge. It doesn't mean we have the capacity to implement that in life. In order to implement, we need will. That fracture is the common experience in our lower experience, lower existence, in the lower nature. The same thing for love. You may have profound love and empathic understanding, profound truth of love and its beauty and delight, but without power to express it in life, you will not be able to bring it out into life and its activities. So, knowledge and will are one in this supramental Gnosis. Love and force are a single movement, they are not separate. The opposites that afflict us here are resolved into their reconciled unity. Reconciled unity. Original unity has been brought out. In the process of manifestation, there is a division, separation, specialization of various functions. They come back to its original source, without discarding the forms of the world and activities of the world. That is the key here. Otherwise, there are schools of yoga that goes into this unity consciousness, but by discarding the world of forms and activities of life and experiencing this oneness in the formless alone without the dynamic power of effective action in the world and its manifestation. So here it is a dynamic truth that is integrating the manifest and the unmanifest, the transcendent, universal, and the individual. The opposites that afflict us here are resolved into their reconciled unity. Good develops its absolute, and evil, divesting itself of its error, returns to the good that was behind it. What appears, what presents itself as evil in the world, which was an original good which had distorted and fragmented and separated, got into the grip of ego and the desire soul, that distortion and the obscurities of lower nature, all that evil can shed and come back to its original divine purity. That was original good from where it has started off. Similarly, sin and virtue vanish in a divine purity and an infallible truth movement. Sin and virtue. In our lower nature, our mind and ethics and emotions classify activities as this is a sin, this is a virtue. All these divisions will end, vanish in a divine purity and an infallible truth movement. It's very important at the same time to remember you cannot prematurely claim that everything is the same. Only when you have established in this highest consciousness, only from that point of view, this infallible truth movement can integrate all movements, bringing together what appears otherwise to be sin and virtue, evil, all that gets synthesized. Without that higher consciousness, when people pretend that everything is one, because you learn the philosophy that everything is one, you have to go beyond the duality of sin and virtue, right and wrong, good and evil, and then without necessary consciousness, when you bring in these frameworks, you make a big blunder. Here, it is only from that highest consciousness, this integration has its truth and effective harmonizing power that brings progress. Dubious evanescence of pleasure disappears in a bliss. That is the play of an eternal and happy spiritual certitude. So the pleasure that we experience through senses, the dubious evanescence, which is like a little bit of that luminous presence of the original bliss, but narrowly limited and tiny little presence. That is what in the normal experience of pleasure is, provided it is not distorted, perverted. In its purity, it is the evanescence of a pleasure. It disappears into a bliss. So this fading pleasure experience, what we experience through senses, there is a moment of height and intensity, then it fades away. That's a normal experience. The little glow of the original bliss finding its expression through sensations. But that pleasure cannot last. It fades away quickly. And that is why it is that dubious evanescence. It is dubious also because it can also have the distortions and perversions coming into it. So that pleasure that comes and goes, that disappears into a bliss that is the play of an eternal and happy spiritual certitude. The self-existent bliss of the spirit finds its expression, and it is not dependent on the sensory fading experience of pleasure, external contact. It is self-existent bliss of the spirit, happy spiritual certitude that comes with it. In perishing, discovers the touch of an ananda which was betrayed by some dark perversion and incapacity of the will of the inconscient to receive it. We normally have this experience of pain. Many of the contacts with life are painful. Not just psychological pain, physical pain, both types of pains. An insect bite, a thorn piercing, all that are very painful to the physical body, or psychologically encounters with people. These are experienced often as very painful. This happens because the inconscient upon which our current evolutionary formations are driving or built their systems of cognition, reception are narrow and limited. Besides, there is a whole perversion of the life energy within the nervous system as a part of its evolutionary emergence, where it is protecting itself through pain and pleasure, avoiding pain, grasping pleasure. In the process, also it gets addicted to perversions. So here, when things are emerging from the inconscient is a space where there is no sensation at all. Everything is absolutely, utterly in sleep, insensible, no sensitivity at all. Out of that, through constant impacts, sensations are brought forth, and early life forms develops increasing sensitivity. And then our mind develops and uses the senses to know wider and more detailed, nuanced understanding. But all these are still built on the foundation of original inconscient, and it carries forward its limitations. Even though we are able to expand and enlarge the limits and develop finer and finer sensibilities, but all that gets enlarged in that process. Even the experience of pain will perish, and discovers the touch of an ananda which was betrayed. Touch of an ananda. Your existence, when in this individual mold of life, impacted by the surrounding life, when you have the original, this supramental gnosis established within you, then these contacts of life with other life forms and its interactions will discover the original ananda that was behind everything. And the contacts with life will not have this character of pain and pleasure. Instead, the self-existent ananda and endless variety of exchange of the delight, which our normal mold of our human nature, which is built on inconscient, is impossible for it to experience. It has to protect itself. It has to defend itself from the invasion of other lives. And that too, the lower life as it is existing is a field of conflict, mutual devouring. Whereas in this greater life, there is a mutual exchange and blending that happens on the foundation of ananda. So let's read this whole shift that happens. Their knowledge and will are one. Love and force a single movement. The opposites that afflicts us here are resolved into their reconciled unity. Good develops its absolute, and evil, divesting itself of its errors, returns to the good that was behind it. Sin and virtue vanish in a divine purity and an infallible truth movement. The dubious evanescence of pleasure disappears in a bliss. That is the play of an eternal and happy spiritual certitude. And pain in perishing discovers the touch of an ananda which was betrayed by some dark perversion and incapacity of the will of the inconscient to receive it. This is the transformation we are looking at. We are not denying the world and its contacts and exchanges and manifest world. And this manifest world in which life is engaged with other life forms, this can undergo profound transformation once the supramental force is established. And it can become a field of the divine. Ananda playing out in all interactions, the profound unity, harmony, and delight manifesting here in this physical, material world, where the very substance itself becomes receptive, responsive to that divine music coming from the supramental Gnosis. These things, to the mind, an imagination or a mystery, become evident and capable of experience as the consciousness rises out of the limited embodied matter mind. Limited embodied matter mind. Our brain is matter, physical material substance, in which mind is finding its expression. Brain and mind are two different things. Brain is the organ through which the mind is expressing itself. In order to express itself, it has built the brain. That is how yogic consciousness looks at, which is quite different from the very scientific approaches where it says it is the brain is what is creating the mind. Brain is the context in which mind is emerging. Though that view, eventually you will discover that consciousness is the foundation. It is from the foundation. In order for consciousness to express, it is creating material structures. And the brain and the whole nervous system is a material framework created by the mental consciousness to express itself. So the consciousness rises out of its limited embodied matter mind. Matter mind is this, our brain, nervous system, and in fact it goes all the way down to very material level. Even at the very cellular level, there is mind involved and its structures and patterns working. Matter mind all the way to hardcore physical material substance. There is involved mind there. Whereas in our space like brain, that too is material. Mind has become self-conscious, self-aware, reflective, more revealed. The mind, these things to the mind, an imagination or a mystery becomes evident and capable of experience. Our normal mind is not capable of experience. And therefore, when it goes inward into deeper states, often you can't recollect anything. It is almost experienced like a sleep state. You were in some sort of a deep inner trance. When you come back, you don't remember anything. And therefore, it is lost. So to consciously experience not only inward going, even ascension into the higher planes, developing that capability, capable of experience, as the consciousness rises out of the limited embodied matter mind. So consciousness is expressing itself as mental consciousness. So the mental being can pull itself out and ascend into other ranges. The consciousness as mind is only one way of expressing. There is same consciousness expressing it as a vital being, physical being, Then there is inwardly, in the deeper depth, there is a psychic being. Above, there is spiritual being, all the way to supramental being. The mind and these things to the mind, an imagination or a mystery, become evident and capable of experience as the consciousness rises out of limited, embodied matter mind to the freedom and fullness of the higher and the higher ranges of the super intelligence. The freedom and fullness of the higher. There is certain freedom and fullness in the higher ranges. And higher ranges of the super intelligence. So even within that higher, there is a higher range of this super intelligence. And this is not artificial intelligence. This is the original intelligence above, spiritual intelligence. But they can become entirely true and normal only when the supramental becomes the law of the nature. So these highest ranges can become entirely true and normal only when the supramental becomes the law of nature. Law of nature. For example, the mind is now an established law. The brain has been developed. The human being as a species has been forged out of the animals. And in this human species, the mental development has been established. It has become a law of nature. Mind and mental consciousness is not something supernature. It has become normal, established faculty of consciousness in nature, expressed through the human beings. We find its limited expressions in the animals, but in human beings, the mind and mental consciousness become very visible, clear, and globally present. It's an established law and rhythm and process of nature. But the spiritual and supramental, they are not yet an established norm in nature. We have examples of individuals who have ascended to higher nature, accessed spiritual consciousness and expressed it. But these were individual siddhis of an individually liberated people. It is not yet an established principle, an established law and capacity in the manifest nature of our earth consciousness. This is something very, very important. What Sri Aurobindo is looking at is shifting at this whole earth consciousness itself, where the supramental has been brought and established as a law of nature, established principle in nature. That means eventually this whole earth consciousness shift and it will express itself through a new species forged out of human beings. Just like out of animals, human beings have been brought forth in order to express the mind. The same way, in order to make supermind expressed here in material nature, it will forge out, it will evolve human species. At least a selected set of ready people have been pushed into a higher level of possibility, and their very physical nature will undergo change, and supermind will be able to directly express through them. And that is the nature. That is where the birthing of the new species who embodies supramental consciousness on earth, it will be an expression of the law of nature when nature has been spiritualized, supramentalized. This is our evolutionary future towards which we are going. Unlike the spiritual history in the past, individuals ascended into higher planes and developed certain siddhis that found expression in isolated individuals. We can say this was the proof of the concept, not yet a mass production on earth. Now time has come, and this larger manifestation is bound to happen it is decreed according to Sri Aurobindo. So these things to the mind, an imagination or a mystery, become evident and capable of experience as the consciousness rises out of limited embodied matter mind to the freedom and fullness of the higher and higher ranges of the superintelligence. But they can become entirely true and normal only when the supramental becomes the law of the nature. Supramental becoming the law of the nature. And that transition, how to bring that not just into single individual, universalized individual who is imprinting that law of supermind into our species. And that's the work Mother and Sri Aurobindo was doing, pioneering this evolutionary transformation, ascending into the supramental consciousness and bringing that into the mind, into the vital, in all the way down to the material, physical, all the way to even the cellular consciousness undergoing change. So there is a whole spiritual cellular re-engineering, if we may use that term. The cellular level transformation which we see Mother was exploring, because this is the very material frame of life that emerged millions and millions of years ago. No? A single life cell, from there the whole life journey began. And we are still a collection of cells. And these cells carry the memory of the past and built on inconscient, where the law of death is still part of it. So all these laws and rules of nature that is already established by the past will get overwritten by the supramental manifestation, transforming these levels of consciousness. And the law of nature fundamentally changing when the supermind gets established as a universal principle operationalized here in this material nature, of which human beings are the vehicles to do that. And that is our role, evolutionary role here on this planet. And it is for that reason great souls have taken birth, and the very reason you are seeking something beautiful higher, because that fire is finding its urge, its aspiration is getting lit. So the search is there. So there is this aspiration driving you to find the right knowledge. Therefore, you listen to podcasts like this, study Sri Aurobindo, understand their works, and see how you can consciously participate in this miraculous evolutionary transformation happening on Earth. It is therefore on the accomplishment of this ascent and the possibility of a full dynamism from these highest levels descending into earth consciousness that is dependent, the justification of life, its salvation, its transformation into a divine life in a transfigured terrestrial nature, terra, from our earthly material existence. This is where we are looking at a divine life to be established, not in any heavens. And the method to do it is that ascension into these higher planes, bringing its full dynamism all the way into descending levels of the mind, vital, down to material, physical. So that this whole earth consciousness undergoes transformation. And this transformation, upon this transformation depends the justification of life and its salvation. The very purpose of evolution here on earth is not to end the cycle of rebirth, but to fulfill the evolutionary intention of nature. That is to bring the divinity here into matter and matter itself getting divinized. This is where the justification of life itself is. It is not in escape from life, ending of the cycle of rebirth. That is a fundamental error brought forth by many schools of yoga in India, during the period of ascetic spirituality that was withdrawing from life. That error has to be corrected, and we have to be very clear about it. And there is a reason for evolution unfolding on earth. And that justification comes from this transformation of earthly life into divine life. So it is therefore on the accomplishment of this ascent and on the possibility of a full dynamism from these highest levels descending into earth consciousness that is dependent the justification of life, its salvation, its transformation into a divine life in a transfigured terrestrial nature. And we are the laboratory in which nature is working this out. And our inmost aspiration, the call of your soul that is making you seek and search and find answers to questions that you cannot ignore anymore. And the more you discover, the more enthusiastic you become, more joyful you find the journey, more thirsty you become, and you are ready to embark upon the adventure. And this is part of that larger awakening unfolding here on earth. The nature of the integral yoga, so conceived, so conditioned, progressing by these spiritual means. You see, integral yoga is progressing, developing through spiritual methods. It is not a mechanical method. When we use, for example, when it comes to body is a mechanical device, and it requires largely systematized, almost mechanical methods. For example, developing your body strength requires exercises that are repeated again and again and again, almost mechanically. But it's only applicable to bodily level. Even there, only when the consciousness is put into it, it becomes far more effective and impactful. Real method of integral yoga is essentially spiritual. Turning of the consciousness inward to come in touch with the psychic being. Now, this cannot be done by any mechanical method. It is a shift in consciousness from the outer being to the inmost. It's an inner movement. So is opening upward. It is an inner movement to the spiritual, and receiving too is an inner movement. It is a psycho-spiritual method where we are directly contacting higher, deeper and higher ranges of consciousness by turning towards them, opening to them, and receiving them into us. So the nature of the integral yoga, so conceived, so conditioned, progressing by these spiritual means, turning upon this integral transformation of nature. Integral transformation. It is not a partial transformation, but an integral transformation of nature. Determines of itself its answer to the question of the ordinary activities of life and their place in the yoga. So we have our ordinary daily life, mundane activities. So this very inner movement and transformation will illumine and indicate what you will do with the activities of your daily life. This light and this inner guidance and the dynamic force that is descending from above is wise and powerful enough to show you what to do with each and every activity that you perform. They will illuminate, transform it, take you forward without rejecting anything unless it is utterly irrelevant to the process. So the nature of the integral yoga, so conceived, so conditioned, progressing by these spiritual means, turning upon this integral transformation of the nature, determines of itself its answer to the question of the ordinary activities of life and their practice place in the yoga. We started this chapter with that inquiry. What do you do with the daily life activities? They fundamentally undergo transformation when these inner conditions are the foundation of your action. Therefore, there is not and cannot be here any ascetic or contemplative or mystic abandonment of works and life altogether. So, obvious, right? Now, there is no question of abandonment of works and life altogether. There is no withdrawal to an ascetic life or a contemplative or mystical inner life alone. You cannot abandon. That is not the way. Any gospel of an absorbed meditation and inactivity. So there is no gospel of absorbed meditation. Many schools promote this as the highest thing that you can accomplish, an absorbed meditation and inactivity. If you are able to sit for hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 1 week, 1 month in an absorption, that means you have reached the highest. This is a false approach from an integral yoga perspective because it creates a huge imbalance where you harvest the riches of the inner world but become incapable of dealing with the outer material world and bring it into this life. That requires a dynamic engagement with life itself from the very beginning, not later. So no absorbed meditation and inactivity. Any cutting away or condemnation of the life force and its activities. Life force in us, the prana shakti, that is rushing towards life. There is no killing of it, there is no cutting away of it. It is used from the very early on. There is no condemnation of the life force. Any rejection of the manifestation in the earthly life. So we are vehicles, channels through which nature is manifesting various things in this material nature. And there is no denial of it, rejection of it. We remain as the vehicles, as the channels of manifestation. But we will enhance it by opening to the spiritual and supramental forces. They find their expression here in this material nature. So there is not and cannot be here any ascetic or contemplative or mystic abandonment of works and life altogether. Any gospel of an absorbed meditation and inactivity, any cutting away or condemnation of the life force and its activities, any rejection of the manifestation in the earth nature. Here in this material life, this is where our game is unfolding. It may be necessary for the seeker at any period to withdraw into himself, to remain plunged in his inner being, to shut out from him the noise and the turmoil of the life of the ignorance until a certain inner change has been accomplished or something achieved without which a further effective action on life has become difficult or impossible. But this can only be a period or an episode, a temporary necessity or a preparatory spiritual maneuver. It cannot be the rule of this yoga or its principle. So a temporary withdrawal to intensify an inner plunge, to gain that experience, that ability to withdraw from the material nature into the inner dimensions by conscious choice and developing that experience in order to access certain range and its forces, to be more effective in the outer world, that is allowed. And that may be required for individuals according to the way they are developing. But it cannot be the rule and the law of integral yoga. Ideal is to engage with life directly with our deep inner aspiration. So, yet, these periods of inward plunge is allowed when it is required. So, it may be necessary for the seeker at any period to withdraw into himself, withdrawing from all the activities, withdrawing into oneself, to remain plunged in his inner being. Stay in the inmost inner space. To shut out from him the noise and the turmoil of the life of the ignorance. So there is this life of ignorance outside, all its noise. To shut that out and go and plunge in the inner nature. One should have the capacity to do that. There should not be any incapacity of withdrawing and plunging inward and being absorbed in that. That capacity has to be developed. It is necessary. The noise and turmoil of the life of the ignorance until a certain inner change has been accomplished. Why we are doing this inner plunge? It is until a certain inner change has been accomplished or something achieved in terms of inner transformation, something achieved without which a further effective action on life has become difficult or impossible. So while engaging with life, we will encounter situations and a stage in life where we see that further action in the life cannot proceed without a further inner discovery, further inner growth. That is the moment where you turn inward for an intense sadhana, plunge inward, access deeper, higher states of consciousness, then bring that into this action in the world to break the limitations, to find your breakthrough in action in the world. So without which a further effective action on life has become difficult or impossible. So that is the condition in which you plunge inward. This doesn't mean that 24 hours we run around like headless chicken. We have to have a healthy routine where proper sleep, proper rest, proper meditation, inner rest, inner quietude, action in the world, work in the world, the right balance, the right amount of work, the right amount of rest, right food, right amount of sleep, all that is necessary. So there is no question of continuously engaging in action. Physical body has its limitation. So we need to respect the body and its needs, requirements. And as the development of consciousness deepens, we would know how to modify our dinacharya, the daily routines. And every routine must have the right balance, where your inner is the foundation that is deepening, and outer is only an expression of that deepening. It is to the extent that inner deepening is unfolding, you are engaging with life. Whenever you see that inner is losing balance, you dive deeper to regain the balance and then come out into action. So there is an inward movement, outer, then outward, forward movement. Inward, outward, all this, there is a fluctuation, there is a cyclicity to that process. So this long inward plunge and a withdrawal from life, this can only be a period or an episode, a temporary necessity or a preparatory spiritual maneuver. It cannot be the rule of his yoga or its principle. This cannot be the principle of long withdrawal. Rather, we need a balanced routine on a daily basis, not full withdrawal from life. Because one of the danger of long retreats is that increasing inability to handle life and its action. A splitting up of the activities of human existence on a religious or an ethical basis or both together. A restriction to the works of worship only or the works of philanthropy and beneficence only would be contrary to the spirit of the integral yoga. So there are groups or various schools that focus extensively on the works of worship, especially when the path of love and devotion, restricting into worship alone as the works of worship only as the method of spiritual progress, or coming from the seva charity mindset with the works of philanthropy or beneficence only. So these are the molds through which people begin to see, if you are into spiritual life, you need to have these philanthropic activities, beneficency for providing welfare to underprivileged, all that, or having your devotional worship. These, of course, they can be all part of it, but limiting will be contrary to the spirit of integral yoga. So a splitting up of the activities of human existence on a religious or an ethical basis, or both together. So this is typically what religions and ethics do. A restriction to the works of worship only, or to the works of philanthropy and beneficence only. This is the kind of restriction the religious or ethical approach bring in, and this is not the method approached this is not acceptable in integral yoga. It will be contrary to integral yoga. Any merely mental rule or merely mental acceptance or repudiation is alien to the purpose and method of its discipline. The mental rules. Mind is a rule maker, law maker. It will come up with the rules and regulations. But the problem with the mind and its rules is that it becomes very rigid. It cannot adapt spontaneously and naturally to the continuously changing life context. And the moment it tries to adapt, the lower instrumentation, the vital, will come up and hijack the rational intelligence and drag it down into paths of diversion, distraction, impulse. So in order to avoid such downfall, we come up with mental rules. But they restrict us, because we cannot go into the psychic direct guidance that is moment to moment, or opening to the Shakti and her action that is even more directly spontaneous, effective. This cannot happen when we create rigid mental rules. So any merely mental rule or merely mental acceptance or repudiation is alien to the purpose and method of its discipline. Integral yoga's discipline is not based on such mental rules and mental acceptance. All must be taken to a spiritual height and placed upon a spiritual basis. The spiritual height and the spiritual basis, that is what is the foundation. The presence of an inner spiritual change and an outer transformation must be enforced upon the whole of life and not merely on a part of life. Our entire life, all its activities must be impacted by the inner spiritual change that finds its expression as an outer transformation. And this must be enforced upon whole of life and not merely on a part of life. All must be accepted that is helpful towards this change or admits it. So it is towards this change, the inner shift and corresponding outer transformation, anything that is supportive of that is accepted and admitted. And all must be rejected that is incapable or inept or refuses to submit itself to the transforming movement. So in this transforming movement of growing inwardization and discovery and emergence of the psychic being and a corresponding outer transformation, anything that is not able to accept it, if anything that is resisting and revolting, these are incapable of transformation or refuse to submit itself, they automatically get rejected. These are the things to be rejected. So all must be rejected that is incapable. There are many parts that are incapable of change, many habits that are established, they are incapable of change, and there is overriding destruction of those formations and a fundamental transformation, or inept or refuses to submit itself, those who are not willing to obey a higher principle, higher light and higher force, that is, if they are not willing to submit, that is where the rejection happens. And to the transforming movement, everything has to be brought into the transforming movement. If they cannot handle it, then they get rejected. So fundamentally, all activities are embraced and brought into the light and force emerging from within and above. And this light and force from above and within automatically does the filtering, automatically does the rejection and transformation. Anything that is fundamentally capable of transformation is taken up. Everything that is not capable is rejected or transformed if they are open. There must be no attachment to any form of things or of life, any object, any activity. So in the name of sadhana, not to get attached to any particular form of things of life, any particular form of things or of life, any object, any activity. All must be renounced if need be. All must be renounced if need be. Remember Sri Aurobindo in his life. In the Alipur jail, he had profound spiritual awakening and realizations, and then he comes out and he launches Karma Yogin, the magazine. For a year, he was running that Karma Yogin and energizing the whole nation. And that is the moment where there was this inner call. And his yoga was Karma Yoga, action in the field of politics. In that context, he receives the inner call to drop all that work and go to Chandurnagar, and eventually from there to Pondicherry. So he drops that entire work that he was building up. He leaves everything. He renounced everything. That's a supreme example of a completely unattached but totally immersed work, Nishkama Karma, where the moment you have an inner adesh to leave things, he drops everything without attachment. There must be no attachment to any form of things or of life, any object, any activity. All must be renounced if need be. All must be admitted that the divine chooses as its material for the divine life. All must be admitted. Not just renunciation. If the inner guidance is saying, take on this activity, you must admit that. No matter how the conventional society treats something as spiritual, something as unspiritual, if the inner guidance is saying you have to build this business, you are building the business. If it is saying you have to engage in this political battle, that is what you engage with. If it is saying you have to find the solution to this mathematical profound problem, that is what you engage with. It's all done from inner guidance, inner light, inner force, and it's a necessity. Whether it is renunciation or plunging deep into a work, everything is guided by the inner discernment, inner psychic emerging presence, as well as the divine Shakti directing things. So together, the psychic and the Shakti together makes these choices of renouncing or admitting, rejecting or surrendering to. All that spontaneously, naturally happens. So there must be no attachment to any form of things or of life, any object, any activity. All must be honored, renounced if need be. All must be admitted that the divine chooses as its material for the divine life. But what accepts or rejects must be neither mind nor open or camouflaged vital will of desire, no ethical sense, but the insistence of the psychic being. Here is the fundamental clue here, which I have already explained. It cannot be a mind making the decision or a camouflaged way the vital desire is using the mind to make a choice, or insistent or an ethical sense. None of this. No ethical sense is the reference point. It cannot be a camouflaged vital making the choices. It cannot be the mental rule, mental opinions. None of this. But the insistence of the psychic being alone. That is why in this yoga, finding the psychic being, coming in touch with the psychic being and its guidance is utmost important. This is the very foundation upon which this yoga rests. No dependency on the mental rules, no dependency on the vital preferences, no dependency on the ethical sense. So what accepts or rejects must be neither mind nor open or camouflaged vital will of desire, nor ethical sense, but the insistence of the psychic being, the command of the divine guide of the yoga, the command of the divine guide of the yoga, the vision of the higher self or spirit, the illumined guidance of the master, master with capital M. It is the direct guidance by the master from above, the spirit. You can call the mother wisdom, the spirit, the master, divine guide, whatever be the vocabulary you're comfortable with. There is a profound dynamic power and its light, its force that makes this difference. It is not our mind, it's not our ethical sense, it is not our camouflaged vital nature. So, what accepts or rejects must be neither mind nor open or camouflaged vital will of desire, nor ethical sense, but the insistence of the psychic being, the command of the divine guide of the yoga, the vision of the higher self or spirit, the illumined guidance of the master. The way of the spirit is not a mental way, a mental rule, or mental consciousness cannot be its determinant or its leader. So the way of the spirit, which is different from the way the mind deals with things. So the way of the spirit is not a mental way, a mental rule, or a mental consciousness cannot be its determinant or its leader. Mind cannot lead this yoga, period. Mind has to learn to become silent, receptive to the way of the spirit. Equally, a combination or a compromise between two orders of consciousness, the spiritual and the mental, or the spiritual and the vital, or a mere sublimation from within of life outwardly unchanged, cannot be the law or the aim of the yoga. So there is a tendency to create these combinations. One combination is spiritual and mental. You bring in some mental rules and some spiritual principles and use that as a reference. That won't work. Other is spiritual and vital. A refined vital, the emotional being and its preferences combined with the spiritual. This is another combination people try out. This too is not the right method. Nor sublimation from within of life outwardly unchanged. So that is your inner life getting refined more and more and more and more into finer domains, but outer life unchanged. These two will not work. So none of these three are suitable for the integral yoga. The law and aim of integral yoga cannot be built upon such limited foundations. So equally, a combination or a compromise between two orders of consciousness, mental consciousness, spiritual consciousness, or spiritual consciousness and vital consciousness, inner, outer. So a compromise between two orders of consciousness, the spiritual and the mental, or the spiritual and the vital, or a mere sublimation from within of life from within of life outwardly unchanged, cannot be the law or the aim of the yoga. All life must be taken up, but all life must be transformed. So not only taking up, transformed. All must become a part, a form, an adequate expression of a spiritual being in the supramental nature. So transformed, or everything become a part, a form, an adequate expression, not an inadequate expression, an adequate expression of a spiritual being in the supramental nature. So that is the movement towards which we are looking at. All life must be taken up, but all life must be transformed. All must become a part, a form, an adequate expression of a spiritual being in the supramental nature. This is the height and crowning movement of a spiritual evolution in the material world. Height and crowning movement of a spiritual evolution in the material world. Earth is this material world. Here is where a spiritual evolution taking place. This evolution is not just the evolution of outer form. There is an evolution of underlying consciousness. A spiritual consciousness is emerging. And the crowning movement of this is the manifestation of the supramental consciousness here in these molds of life. So this is the height and crowning movement of a spiritual evolution in the material world. And as the change from the vital animal to mental man made life another thing altogether, vital animal to mental man, we are mental beings emerged out of vital animals. Animals are pure vital beings with a little, only very touch of mind, whereas we are fully mental beings, but still vital in our foundational layers. And in that transition, there is a fundamental shift that happened from animal to human, emergence of the mind. As the change from the vital animal to mental man made life another thing altogether in basic consciousness, scope, and significance. So there is basic consciousness of human being is very different from the animal. And the scope of human life is again different from animal. The significance of human life is again different from animal life. So when the shift happened from the animal to man, there was a fundamental shift happened to life here on earth. It made life something else. So made life another thing altogether in basic consciousness, scope, significance. So this change from the materialized mental being, that's what we are. We are materialized mental being. We have a material body in which our mental being is finding its expression. This materialized mental being is shifting. So this change from the materialized mental being to the spiritual and supramental being, using but not dominated by matter. This new shift will be using matter, it will not be dominated by matter. Whereas our mental being is dominated by matter. It is subjugated by matter. Though we try to manipulate matter, control matter, we struggle, but matter dominates. This change from the materialized mental being to the spiritual and supramental being, using but not dominated by matter, must take up life and make it another thing altogether. So when the supramental consciousness manifests, which will take up life and radically transform it, then the flawed, imperfect, limited human, quite other in its basic consciousness, scope, and significance. So the very significance of life here on earth, the scope of life here on earth, the consciousness of life here on earth, everything will be radically changed when the supramental consciousness finds its foothold here in our material existence, and it will fundamentally change. And this is what will lead to birth of a new species on earth and a new type of material body itself, because supermind is capable of transforming physical substance, whereas the mind is incapable, it cannot. So let's read this very critical, important line. This is the height and crowning movement of a spiritual evolution in the material world. And as the change from vital animal to mental man made life another thing altogether in basic consciousness, scope, significance. So, this change from the materialized mental being to the spiritual and supramental being, using but not dominated by matter, must take up life and make it another thing altogether than the flawed, imperfect, limited human, quite other in its basic consciousness, scope, and significance. We human beings are very, very limited, flawed, imperfect. We are work in progress. We are prototype in the laboratory of nature, not yet a well developed, perfect product nature is intending to develop. So, when the supramental consciousness is brought down, this imperfect human mold will evolve and become more perfect being. That will be possible with supramental manifestation. All forms of life activity that cannot bear the change must disappear. All that can bear it will survive and enter into the kingdom of the spirit. So we will be looking at all the activities of human life from this fundamental transformational perspective. Anything that can open to it and become the vehicles will be taken up. Any activity that cannot open to it, incapable of bearing it, will be dissolved, will disappear. So all forms of life activity that cannot bear the change must disappear. All that can bear it will survive and enter into the kingdom of the spirit. So we are not choosing from a mental rule or an ethical sense or a religious sense what kind of activities are acceptable. We are making that selection from the direct action of the Shakti acting through us. A divine force is at work and will choose at each moment what has to be done or has not to be done, what has to be momentarily or permanently taken up, momentarily or permanently abandoned. So all these decisions are coming directly from the divine force, the Shakti. What is to be momentarily or permanently taken up, or momentarily or permanently abandoned. Taking up or abandoning, these are all done directly under the guidance of the Shakti acting through you moment to moment. A divine force at work and will chooses at each moment what has to be done or has not to be done. What has to be momentarily or permanently taken up, momentarily or permanently abandoned. So in early stages, one confusion happens is you may, at a moment, you have a profound, beautiful insight and you see that this is the work to be done. And you wholeheartedly jump into it. But meanwhile, the inner spirit has withdrawn. And we find that we are struggling and striving. Things become increasingly effortful, as battle, as struggle. We have already missed the dynamism of the spirit's guidance and its force. But if you confuse that, you translate the previous inspiration into a mental rule, because I had an inspiration and a guidance in the past, and I am clinging to it as an outer mental rule and trying to continue, you miss the moment-to-moment guidance where the spirit is telling, stop that work right now, withdraw, you have something else to do. If we cling to the forms of early inspirations and make it into a mental rule, we fall into the trap of the ego and outer personality. So this has to be avoided. It is a moment-to-moment guidance. It is extremely flexible, guiding moment to moment, choosing the right thing at the right time, and accepting or rejecting things. And out of that, many things become permanently settled in you. Many things permanently rejected. All that are natural consequences of action of the Shakti. 4. Provided we do not substitute for that our desire or our ego. And to that end, the soul must be always awake, always on guard, alive to the divine guidance, resistant to the undivine misleading from within or without us. Because the various forces can take possession and even act from within. So these things must be very, very careful. Always on guard, alive to the divine guidance, resistant to the undivine misleading from within or without us. That force is sufficient, capital F force, the Shakti, is sufficient and alone competent, and she will lead us to the fulfillment along ways and by means too large, too inward, too complex for the mind to follow, much less to dictate. So this movement is way too complex, inward and large. The mind cannot truly know it, but the Shakti knows it. So we have to be always on vigilance and constantly be in touch with the psychic being, not get carried away by the mental rules or the vital impulsions and outer ego and its formations. Be vigilant all the time to be in touch with the psychic being, where the discernment spontaneously happens, and it shows when the Shakti is acting, which is the force you can surrender to, what has to be rejected. 4. Provided we do not substitute for that our desire or our ego. And to that end, the soul must be always awake, always on guard, alive to the divine guidance, resistant to the undivine misleading from within or without us. That force is sufficient and alone competent, and she will lead us to the fulfillment along ways and by means too large, too inward, too complex for the mind to follow, much less to dictate. Sometimes in our inward plunge, we can have an illuminating experience, beings of even light, telling, do this, do that. But without the actual psychic presence and its guidance, we can easily get misguided. So just because something got revealed in the mind, in the heart, or luminous in its appearance, doesn't mean it is the divine Shakti. You need to always refer back to the psychic being and its discernment, so that moment to moment you are open only to the Shakti, nothing else. It is an arduous and difficult and dangerous way, but there is none other. There is no other way than this approach. It's a dangerous, difficult path, arduous path, and there is no other. 2 rules alone there are that will diminish the difficulty and obviate the danger. 2 rules. What are the rules that will eliminate the difficulty and minimize the danger? One must reject all that comes from the ego. That is the condition, from the vital, from the mere mind. And it's presumptuous reasoning incompetence, all that ministers to these agents of the ignorance. So here are the 3 agents of ignorance. One is ego, one is desire, other is the reasoning incompetence, the presumptuous reasoning incompetence of the mind. Mind has a tendency to believe that I know, I have studied so much, and I can reason so well, and it is very presumptuous, but highly incompetent. But mind by itself may not recognize it. The psychic being can clearly see it, but mind by itself doesn't recognize it. So these 3 agents of ignorance are not to be listened to. This is the rule number 1. That is, one must reject all that comes from the ego, the vital desire, from the mere mind, and its presumptuous reasoning incompetence, all that ministers to these agents of ignorance. Mind can easily tell that take this path because of this reason, you have to go this way, all that. Don't listen to that. Rely on the psychic discernment. One must learn to hear and follow the voice of the inmost soul, the direction of the Guru, the command of the Master, the working of the Divine Mother. So there is inmost soul and its voice, the direction of the Guru, command of the Master, the working of the Divine Mother. All these movements are essentially one movement, one power that is acting. There is the Divine Mother Shakti working. That is an expression of the Master of the Lord of the Yoga, whose Shakti, who is acting. It is the Master's command she is executing. And that is what manifests within us as the Guru within. And that is what expresses itself as the soul's guidance. One must learn to hear and follow the voice of the inmost soul, the direction of the Guru, the command of the Master, the working of the Divine Mother. Because the Divine is present across, above and below. In the evolution from below, that emergence is the psychic being, the Divine present as the psychic being. That's a portion of the divinity within us, guiding from within, which is discerning the Divine from above as Shakti pouring down her light, her force, her command, and the inner Guru. All that is discerned by these. Whoever clings to the desires and weaknesses of the flesh and cravings and passions of the vital in its turbulent ignorance, the dictates of his personal mind, unsilenced and unillumined by a greater knowledge, cannot find the true inner law, and is heaping obstacles on the way of the divine fulfillment. There is this true inner law given by the psychic being, but in order to know it, this is the condition: unsilenced and unillumined mind. When your mind is not silent, if it is not illumined by a higher knowledge, it cannot even recognize the psychic being. Or if you cling to the vital desires and its cravings, whoever clings to the desires and weaknesses of the flesh, our bodily life and its demands, cravings, all that, clings to the desires and weaknesses of the flesh, the cravings and passions of the vital in its turbulent ignorance. There's a turbulent ignorance of the vital nature. If you cling to it, you get lost. Or the dictates of his personal mind, unsilenced and unillumined. So the personal mind, it has to be silenced and made illumined by a greater knowledge. Without it, cannot find the true inner law and is heaping obstacles on the way of the divine fulfillment. Without that inner law, we keep heaping up, piling up the obstacles on the way by clinging to the desires of the vital nature or continuously going with the dictates of the mind. Whoever is able to detect and renounce those obscure agencies and to discern and follow the true guide within and without will discover the spiritual law and reach the goal of the yoga. So there is a true guide within and without. Guru is ever present all around. We exist in this universe permeated by the divine presence. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam. And there is a inner guidance, inner discernment emerging from the psychic being. Whoever follows that, whoever is able to detect and renounce those obscuring agencies, these agencies are the instruments of agencies of ignorance, the ego, the desire, the mind, and their clingings, dictates. Whoever is able to detect and renounce, these are the things to be renounced. It is not the outer material wealth and positions and stuff like that to be renounced. This is the essential renunciation. Whoever is able to detect and renounce those obscuring agencies and to discern and follow the true guide within and without will discover the spiritual law. If you are able to do it, the spiritual law of your daily choice will be discovered and reach the goal of the yoga. This is the promise, inevitable outcome when you are able to listen to the inner guide and follow that guidance. A radical and total change of consciousness is not only the whole meaning, but in an increasing force and by progressive stages, the whole method of integral yoga. A radical and total change of consciousness is not only the whole meaning, but in an increasing force and by progressive stages, the whole method of the integral yoga. So integral yoga starts off as a random movements of the divine guidance and Shakti's action. This force is working randomly, progressively, it's becoming more and more intense and increasing force, intensity, propelling you towards a total change of consciousness and transformation. So it's not a linear process, it is non-linear. Linearity is of the mind and its limited way of knowing, whereas this movement more rhythmic. It is following a greater law and process. When you listen, when you bring in the psychic discernment, you recognize here is the door that is opening. Here is a distraction, an impulsion, an attraction, a temptation not to go that way. So that discernment will come. And progressively, as the purification deepens, then the force can pour in more and more and more and more. Only a purified instrument can receive the light and force. So initial stage is of purification, elimination of more and more of the obscurities so that the light and force can come in, and it will increase the intensity progressively and move towards a radical transformation of consciousness. A radical and total change of consciousness is not only the whole meaning, but is an increasing force and by progressive stages, the whole method of the integral yoga. So it starts off lightly, like alap in Indian music, quietly, and then it goes progressively building up its intensity. And eventually the divine Jugalbandi that will be unfolding through the instrumentation. An intensity of transformation starting slow and quiet and steady and building up the intensity. That is how the transformation of integral yoga unfolds. So with that, we have come to the end of this episode 88. Not only this episode, end of this chapter, the Ascent of Sacrifice. Wow, what a beautiful picture Sri Aurobindo is painting. And I'm learning so much by just reading these lines and dwelling on it. This is really, for me, it is a sadhana of yoga of knowledge, works of knowledge and love. That worshipping of the Master through these works, through these acts as an offering. It's an offering to you, it is an offering to the divine in you, divine in all. And thank you for being with me in this journey. Thank you for being there. See you next week. Thank you.